In a subway tunnel, we see a bizarre-looking man step in front of a speeding train. The conductor throws on the brakes when he witnesses its inhuman face as it braces itself and stops the train, throwing it off the tracks. In the back of the train are Bobby and Hank with their dates. The lights go out, allowing them to slip away and into costume and go see what's happening. When they reach the front, the man attacks them and calls himself Grotesque. Beast gets thrown back though, and Iceman begins shooting ice at him, eventually coating him in a thick layer. Grotesque breaks free, scattering the duo. He then turns and runs to the X-Men's surprise, and ducks into a hole in the wall, sealing himself inside. Beast is unable to open the passage, and they decide to head back to their girlfriends. We see Grotesque as he is trying to remember who he is, and knows that he hasn't always been the way he is. He remembers an underground society at constant war with other races. How one day they finally decided to go above ground to fight when they heard a loud explosion. The ceiling begins collapsing on everyone, and afterward, he swore to find the attackers when a sickness begins to spread, killing even the woman he loved. With all of his memories back, he swears to get revenge for the death of his race. At Xavier's school, we see Cyclops as he is training, but messes up and notes Charles's temper. Up next, Charles barks at Angel to practice maneuverability and succeeds until he is caught in a powerful sucking hole, and Jean tries to save him as Xavier yells at her. He chastises her for taking so long, and Cyclops asks if he's being too hard, but Xavier demands perfection. Hank and Bobby enter, and he starts to yell at them for entering in their civilian clothes, telling them that rules are meant to be followed. He disciplines them, and then retires to a study, taking Jean with him. Xavier apologizes for being harsh, and Jean asks him to tell the others about a secret, but he refuses and begins an experiment with her. We swap to a college in Manhattan as a professor demonstrates a machine that creates earthquakes. He goes to activate it to prove it works, while underground, Grotesque feels the tremors. He's reminded of his past again when another tremor hits, and he believes it to be aimed at him. Angered, he vows to find and destroy the machine when he chooses to use it to destroy mankind instead. Back at the college, one man expresses that the Earth could be destroyed with it, and they agree to move and guard the device. Charles rejoins the others and instructs them to go find Grotesque, but keeps Jean with him. They head to the subway, where Beast moves the slab, allowing Cyclops to destroy the rest of it, and the others rush past. They reach the underground city, but find nothing when they locate Grotesque's trail, but are unable to contact the professor. Cyclops sends Angel and Iceman back to the school to update him, while he and Beast continue forward. We see Grotesque as he searches for the weapon, and causes one of the scientists to pass out in fear. Meanwhile, Warren returns to find the professor gone and fills Jean in, but she refuses to go back with him. Warren then notices that she's extremely distracted. Grotesque takes his prisoner underground and begins to question where the weapon is when he hears someone yell at him. Turning around, the villain sees Scott as he tells Hank they need to hold him off when he swears to destroy them. In the school study, Warren demands to know why Jean refuses to help them fight Grotesque. She refuses to say anymore, and Warren demands to see Xavier, who shows up. He assures them that Scott and Hank can handle the villain, but Warren says he's going back to help. Charles orders him to stay though, and tells Jean to watch them, while Bobby reminds his friend that the professor hasn't failed them yet. Meanwhile, Beast is battling Grotesque, who throws him away with little effort. Bouncing back, Beast punches as hard as he can, but the villain isn't fazed and hits back. Cyclops comes to the rescue when Grotesque hurls a piece of machinery at him, and he uses his optic beams to push himself away. Recovering, Scott shoots behind the foe, exploding some machines. However, Grotesque is hardly affected, and Cyclops asks Hank if he's ready to keep fighting. Unexpectedly, Grotesque stops as he has a vision of a man operating the earthquake machine and leaves to find him. Seeing the foe escaping, Beast leaps after him and bounces off the surprisingly solid wall of gas he created. Meanwhile, Grotesque is thinking of the revenge he will get for his people. Returning home, Scott learns of the events with Jean and the professor. Jean walks in and is glad they're okay, but Scott doubts it and demands to see Xavier, but she says they can't and holds them back when she receives a message to bring them to him. Meanwhile, Grotesque breaks into a building, finding the man operating the machine. He pulls off a mask though, revealing himself to be Xavier, who is thrown aside. Turning his back, Grotesque moves to activate the machine when he is struck by Charles's mental bolt. Try as he might though, Charles is unable to prevent the subhuman from activating the machine. The machine activates and begins to send waves into the ground when Angel arrives and flies at the enemy. Using a pair of solar orbs from the mansion, he momentarily blinds the subhuman. Beast moves to attack, but is thrown into Angel. Grotesque goes to use another smoke bomb when he hears Cyclops behind him, who shoots it out of his hand. Elsewhere, Jean checks on the professor, then moves to turn off the weapon, but even her telepathic powers are useless as the building begins shaking. Cyclops continues blasting Grotesque as Iceman coats him in ice when he reflects the beams at Bobby. Charles sees only seconds remain, and he and Jean attack the machine mentally when he chooses to move closer. Moving forward, Jean sees his efforts working as he concentrates harder. The subhuman is fending off the X-Men when he notices the machine stopping and hurries to stop the heroes by grabbing and throwing Angel. Cyclops and Beast are forced to save their friend when Grotesque attacks Xavier, then rips open the machine to try to give it more power, but it ends up exploding on him. Seeing the blast killed the villain, they hurry to Charles, who tells them he is dying from being too close to the explosion. He explains how he tried to stop Grotesque because he was dying and that was why he'd been pushing them so hard, when he praises them with his last breath. They see him unmoving, and Warren tells them that he's gone. Saddened and filled with grief, they carry their mentor's body away. We get a look at Magneto as he learns of Professor Xavier's death and yells for Quicksilver. Swapping over to Charles's funeral, the X-Men are mourning while Scott consoles Jean. At that moment, the mutant speedster Quicksilver is rushing to the funeral when he sees the teens and tries to hide from them. Warren spots him though, and they rush over while remembering hearing that he might have left the Avengers for Magneto. Pietro sees them approaching and fears that they are trying to capture him instead of talking with him. Convinced only Magneto can be trusted, he runs off, leaving the teens surprised when they are called back by the Reverend. Magneto, watching all this, wonders if he's been betrayed and plans to punish the speedster while vowing to destroy the X-Men. Meeting back at the mansion, Scott reveals a button he was told of should the professor die and activates it. A large projector appears, the lights dim, and Charles's image appears, asking them of a final request. He explains of how he'd been pushing them in training, and how he'd been teaching Jean telepathy for when he was gone. He then tells of how Magneto might be back, and if he fails to stop Grotesque, they must carry on. Switching scenes, we see Magneto stronger than ever as he tests his powers. Throwing a ship into the sea, he returns inside as Quicksilver arrives back at the base. Pietro goes to check on his sister when he runs into Toad, who threatens to tell Magneto that he's sneaking around. He brushes Toad aside and goes to Wanda, and we learn that her powers are gone for right now. Scarlet Witch consoles her brother over Xavier's death when Magneto barges in and Toad tells him to punish Quicksilver. Instead, he attacks Toad, and Pietro sees how cruel he has become, but may be Wanda's only chance for help. Asking why he was at the funeral, Pietro's answer angers Magneto, and he reminds him that he's working on a cure for Wanda. He then tells him that a ship will be arriving soon as he leaves and thinks of how he caused Wanda's condition by causing a bullet to graze her head. Days later, Magneto attacks the ship when we see Scott and the others merely used it as bait to find the villain when the ship is lifted out of the ocean. The heroes change into their costumes and Iceman creates a bridge to the island. Inside, Magneto witnesses their arrival and screams that they've come too soon. He thinks of how the computer will allow him to enslave humans and how he's ready to fight the X-Men. As the two parties make their way towards each other, Magneto gets the first strike as he disposes of Jean and Angel. Beast kicks an urn at the villain, but Magneto destroys it. Quicksilver moves to attack, and a distracted Cyclops is blindsided by a metal plate. Toad activates a battering ram, which strikes the team, and Cyclops steps forward and shoots the trap until it is destroyed. Magneto sees that the heroes are gathered together and activates an electric current in the floor, defeating the X-Men, making him victorious. Magneto revels in his victory over the unconscious forms of the X-Men. Quicksilver asks the Master of Magnetism not to kill the heroes, while Toad wants to dispose of them. Deciding not to, he hopes that after their defeat, that they'll join him. Putting Quicksilver in charge, he has them imprisoned. Moments later, Toad is putting specified restraints on each of the X-Men to prevent them from using any of their powers to escape. As the team awaken, they see Wanda and her brother, and Pietro explains how they want to stick with their own kind when Scott scoffs at him, which angers him and the twins leave. Warren spots an object outside his cage and carefully grabs it. He finds it breaks the bars and breaks free and goes to Cyclops, who fears that it's a trap and sends him to get the Avengers to help. Magneto is shocked when Angel flies past him and orders Quicksilver to give chase. Seeing he's being pursued, Angel flies into the air, barely escaping the speedster. He makes his way to New York when a storm appears and he looks for a place to wait it out. Landing on a piece of coral, Warren is shocked when an island begins to rise out of the water. He sees a door open in the wall and chooses to investigate what's inside. Warren finds that it's a facility full of advanced machinery when he is suddenly attacked by a man calling himself the Red Raven. Raven punches Warren, who manages to grab his wing. Breaking free, Raven tells that no one was meant to find that place and that he's protecting his people as he shoots at Angel. Knocking Raven back, he disarms his enemy when he asks to be listened to. Knowing he can beat him, Warren agrees to hear him out. He explains that he caused the end of his people and tells of the race of Birdmen. As a kid, his plane crashed, and being the only one to survive, he was taken in by the Birdmen until he became an adult and tried to stop them from destroying humanity. He tries to tell the king that they'll be outnumbered and defeated, but is ignored and is forced to come up with a way to save everyone. Releasing a suspended animation gas, he knocks everybody out and proceeds to store them inside pods which hold them until Angel appeared. Warren wants to awaken them, but Red Raven says it's too dangerous as he surprises him and shoots him. He prepares to return Angel to the surface while he goes to sink the island again. Activating the machines, Raven plunges the island into the depths of the sea. Angel awakens to find himself adrift, gathers himself, and flies onward towards the Avengers. Scott is worried about Warren and begins to focus his optic beams to try to destroy his restraints. Concentrating, he angles the beam to force open his visor, allowing him to shoot the lead restraints. It shatters and he makes short work of the bands on his arms. He begins looking for the others when he finds Jean, but sees that she's unconscious. He leaves her behind in hopes of finding either Bobby or Hank. Toad sees him and hurries to tell Magneto when he himself is spotted. Cyclops tries to shoot him, but a metal plate blocks it and he is forced to chase after Toad. Unfortunately, he is nowhere to be found. We go back 1 hour and see Warren is remembering his fight with Red Raven when he reaches New York and heads quickly to Avengers Mansion. Back at the island, Cyclops goes down the path that has a faint light. Further down, Quicksilver hears footsteps and thinks it's Toad when he sees it's the escaped Cyclops, who senses someone watching him. Pietro leaps in front of Cyclops, wanting only to talk to him. Not trusting him, he shoots at Quicksilver, who barely dodges. Elsewhere, Toad tells Magneto of Cyclops' escape and, angered at another of his failures, attacks the servant. Toad begs the Master of Magnetism for forgiveness, who turns around, finished with him, and warns that none of the other X-Men had better escape. Quicksilver pleads for Scott to listen, and he finally does. He tells him of how Magneto wants to create a country for all mutants to live in, and that they can live normal lives there. Scott tells Pietro that it sounds too good to be true. Scott, though, has been with Xavier for too long, and is sure that he is making the right choice by stopping Magneto, and that Pietro is a fool to stay with him. Angered, he decides Cyclops is his enemy and assaults him. Moving quickly, Quicksilver grabs Cyclops when he is thrown back and sees that he must stay on guard. Cyclops knows that his only hope is to keep the attack up and hope for a direct shot. With both combatants growing tired, Quicksilver manages to blind his opponent with graphite padding. Magneto is watching when he sees Quicksilver doesn't finish him off when he yells at Toad to keep watching the other heroes so they don't escape. Scarlet Witch walks in and sees that her brother is fighting, when Magneto reassures her that he's fine as they see Cyclops manages to grab Pietro. Successfully breaking free, he tries to knock Cyclops out, but he is able to get a last shot off when it ricochets and hits Quicksilver in the back. Seconds later, Scott sees the unconscious speedster and checks on him. He tries to wake him to get information about Magneto when he hears a voice behind him. Turning around, he sees the Avengers have arrived.